The flames licked 30 feet into the sky, turning the pristine white fence into a crackling inferno as Margaret Thornfield watched in horror from her kitchen window. What she didn't know was that Captain Jake Morrison had been waiting 18 months for this exact moment, the moment when her precious HOA rules would finally meet the raw, unforgiving power of a 2,000-degree training exercise gone accidentally wrong. Captain Jake Morrison stood in his driveway at 6:47 a.m., coffee steam rising from his mug as he watched the sun paint the suburban street in gold. His 1987 Ford fire truck sat gleaming in the morning light, every inch of red paint and chrome polished to perfection. The rig had been his life's work, a fully restored piece of firefighting history that he'd spent 3 years and $40,000 bringing back from the dead. "Beautiful morning, isn't it, Captain?" Jake turned to see his neighbor, Tom Chen, jogging in place at the end of the driveway. Tom's genuine smile was a rare sight on Willowbrook Circle, where most residents barely acknowledged each other's existence. "It is," Jake replied, raising his mug in salute. "Though I have a feeling it's about to get a whole lot more interesting." Tom's brow furrowed. "Everything okay?" Before Jake could answer, the sharp click of heels on asphalt announced the arrival of Margaret Thornfield. The HOA president strode across the street with the purposeful gait of someone who'd spent decades wielding authority like a weapon. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her pressed khakis and polo shirt bore the unmistakable armor of suburban power. "Mr. Morrison," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We need to talk." Tom shot Jake a sympathetic look and continued his jog. Smart man, Jake thought. Margaret stopped precisely 6 feet away, clutching a manila folder against her chest like a shield. "I trust you received my letter. The one about my fire truck being a commercial vehicle that violates HOA regulations." Jake's voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened around the coffee mug. "Yeah, I got it." "Then you understand the situation." Section 4.2 of the Willowbrook Homeowners Association covenant clearly states that no commercial vehicles over 8,000 pounds may be parked in residential driveways. Your apparatus exceeds that limit by a considerable margin. Jake set his coffee down on the truck's running board and turned to face her fully. "Margaret, this isn't a commercial vehicle. It's a restored antique. A piece of history. It's a fire truck, Mr. Morrison. By definition, it's commercial equipment. It's my personal property, fully registered and insured as a recreational vehicle." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "The classification is irrelevant. The weight restriction exists for a reason. Our streets weren't designed for vehicles of this size. This truck weighs less than most RVs in the neighborhood. Hell, the Henderson's Winnebago outweighs it by 3,000 pounds. The Henderson's recreational vehicle is parked in their garage." Jake gestured toward his modest 2-car garage. "You want me to fit a 30-foot fire truck in there? I want you to follow the rules like everyone else." Margaret's voice rose slightly, and Jake caught a glimpse of something deeper than mere bureaucratic authority. This wasn't just about regulations, this was personal. "What's this really about, Margaret?" She straightened, her composure snapping back into place. "It's about maintaining property values and community standards. When residents see a fire truck parked in someone's driveway, they think this is a working-class neighborhood. It affects everyone's investment." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Working class. As if 23 years of running into burning buildings to save people's lives was somehow beneath the dignity of Willowbrook Circle. "I see," he said quietly. "I'm glad you understand. You have 30 days to relocate the vehicle or face a fine of $500 per day." Jake watched her turn to leave, then called out, "Margaret." She paused, not quite looking back. "That working-class fire truck you're so concerned about. It's been sitting in my driveway for 6 months. Funny how it only became a problem after the incident at the community center." Now she did turn around, and Jake saw something flash in her eyes, guilt, maybe, or fear. 3 weeks earlier, Jake had been off duty when the call came in about a kitchen fire at the Willowbrook Community Center. He'd arrived in his personal vehicle to find Margaret standing in the parking lot, watching smoke pour from the building's east wing. The on-duty crew was still 10 minutes out, and Jake had made a decision that probably saved the building. He'd used his keys to enter through the main entrance, found the fire extinguisher, and put out the blaze before it could spread beyond the kitchen. Simple, routine, effective. But Margaret had been furious, not about the fire, but about Jake's unauthorized access to community property. "I don't know what you're implying," she said now, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. This complaint appeared exactly 1 week after I prevented that kitchen fire from burning down our community center." Margaret's jaw tightened. "Your conspiracy theories don't change the regulations, Mr. Morrison. 30 days. She walked away, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts and his coffee. He stood there for a long moment, watching her disappear into her house across the street. The morning's golden light had given way to harsh white sun, and the day's heat was already building. His phone buzzed. A text from Fire Chief Rodriguez: "Training exercise Thursday. Your place still good for the controlled burn demo?" Jake looked at his fire truck, then at Margaret's house with its pristine white fence running along the property line. A slow smile spread across his face as he typed back, "More than good. It's perfect." The rest of the week passed in a blur of legal research and strategic planning. Jake spent his evenings at the kitchen table, surrounded by HOA documents, city ordinances, and fire department regulations. His lawyer, David Kim, had been cautiously optimistic about their chances. "The weight restriction is problematic," David had explained over the phone. "But if we can establish that the truck serves a legitimate community purpose, we might have grounds for an exemption." "What kind of community purpose?" "Emergency preparedness. Public safety demonstrations. Community outreach. You mentioned training exercises." Jake had smiled. "Oh yes. We've got a big one planned for Thursday." Now, as Thursday morning arrived, Jake stood in his backyard surveying the setup. The fire department had delivered a pile of scrap lumber, old furniture, and debris, all perfectly legal materials for a controlled burn training exercise. The pile sat exactly 15 feet from his property line, which put it a comfortable 20 feet from Margaret's fence. Captain Sarah Martinez arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, followed by 2 pumper trucks and a crew of 6 firefighters. She was a 15-year veteran with a reputation for thorough training and absolute professionalism. "Morning, Jake," she said, pulling on her helmet. "Ready for some real-world training?" "Been looking forward to it all week." Sarah surveyed the burn pile and nodded approvingly. "Good setup. Winds from the west, so smoke should blow away from the houses. We'll start with the demonstration burn, then move to ladder operations." "Sounds perfect." As the crew began their preparations, Jake noticed movement in Margaret's kitchen window. She was watching, her face a mask of barely contained irritation. "Good. Let her watch." The fire department's public information officer, Lieutenant Torres, had done his job well. 3 local news crews were setting up their equipment, and a small crowd of neighbors had gathered to watch the demonstration. This was exactly the kind of community engagement that the department loved to showcase. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lieutenant Torres addressed the crowd through a megaphone, "Thank you for joining us today for this fire safety demonstration. Our crews will be conducting a controlled burn to demonstrate proper firefighting techniques and equipment operation." Jake caught Margaret's eye across the yard and gave her a small wave. She disappeared from the window. The burn began at 10:15 a.m. The initial flames were controlled, professional, exactly what you'd expect from a training exercise. The crew worked with practiced efficiency, demonstrating different suppression techniques and explaining safety protocols to the gathered crowd. Then the wind shifted. It was subtle at first, just a slight change in direction that pushed the smoke toward the east instead of the west. Captain Martinez noticed it immediately and called for an adjustment in the water streams. But controlled burns have their own momentum, and this one was just hitting its stride. "We've got a wind shift," Martinez called out. "Increase pressure on the east side." The crew responded instantly, but Jake could see what was happening. The flames were reaching higher now, driven by the shifting air currents. They were still well within the safety parameters, still completely under control, but they were putting on quite a show. And Margaret's pristine white fence was starting to look a little less pristine. The paint was just beginning to blister when Margaret came charging out of her house, her face flushed with anger. "What the hell is going on?" she shouted over the roar of the flames and the diesel engines. Captain Martinez looked up from her position at the control panel. This is a scheduled training exercise. We have all the proper permits. You're damaging." The summons arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic as he handed Jake the legal papers. Margaret Thornfield wasn't just doubling down, she was going nuclear. Willful destruction of property, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of HOA covenants, Jake read aloud to his lawyer over the phone. "She's asking for $50,000 in damages and a permanent injunction against parking the truck in my driveway." David Kim's sigh was audible through the speaker. "This is aggressive, even for an HOA dispute. She's clearly escalating because the media attention didn't go her way." That was an understatement. The Channel 7 story had gone viral, with the hashtag #FireTruckGate trending on social media for 3 days. Margaret had been portrayed as a petty bureaucrat trying to kick a heroic firefighter out of his own neighborhood, while Jake had become a folk hero for ordinary people fighting HOA tyranny. "What's our defense?" Jake asked. "Legitimate training exercise, proper permits, following fire department protocols. The fence damage was incidental to lawful activity." "But Jake, I have to ask, was this really an accident?" Jake looked out his kitchen window at the fire truck. "Does it matter? For the lawsuit? Maybe not. For my ability to represent you with a clear conscience? Absolutely. The training exercise was legitimate. The permits were proper. The wind shifted unexpectedly. Everything else is just a karma." After hanging up, Jake found himself staring at Margaret's house across the street. The damaged fence had been covered with a blue top, but he could still see the charred boards underneath. She'd filed an insurance claim, but the adjuster had been skeptical about coverage for acts of God involving wind-shifted training fires. His phone rang. "Fire Chief Rodriguez." "Jake, we need to talk." "My office, 1 hour." The tone said everything. This wasn't going to be a friendly chat. Chief Rodriguez's office felt smaller than usual, crowded with the weight of unspoken accusations. The chief sat behind his desk, his weathered face showing every one of his 40 years in the fire service. Across from him, Assistant Chief Patricia Gomez reviewed a thick file with the grim expression of someone delivering bad news. "Sit down, Jake," Rodriguez said. Jake remained standing. "If this is about the training exercise, it's about a lot more than that." Rodriguez opened his own file. "I've got a formal complaint from the HOA president alleging that you deliberately damaged her property. I've got a news story that makes it look like we are taking sides in a neighborhood dispute. And I've got the mayor's office asking questions about our permit process. The exercise was by the book. You know that. Was it?" Assistant Chief Gomez looked up from her file. "Because I've been reviewing our protocols and I can't find any documentation supporting a controlled burn that close to residential property." Jake felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Captain Martinez approved the location. "We followed standard safety distances." Captain Martinez says you told her the property line was 30 feet from the burn pile. The actual distance was 15 feet. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on the legal technicalities that he'd forgotten about the measurement discrepancy. It was a small lie, but in the fire service, there were no small lies when it came to safety protocols. "I may have been mistaken about the exact distance," he said carefully. "Mistaken?" Rodriguez's voice rose. "Jake, you've been measuring property lines for training exercises for 15 years. You don't make mistakes like that." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of broken trust. Jake had always prided himself on his integrity, but sitting here now, he realized how quickly that reputation could crumble. "What are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying you're suspended pending an internal investigation. Badge and radio on." The desk. Jake's world tilted. 23 years of service, and it was ending like this, not in a blaze of glory, but in a cloud of suspicion and administrative paperwork. Chief, you know me. You know I wouldn't, do I? Rodriguez stood up, his voice heavy with disappointment. Because the Jake Morrison I know wouldn't mislead his captain about safety distances. He wouldn't use department resources to settle a personal grudge. And he sure as hell wouldn't put his crew in a position where they could be held liable for property damage. The words cut deep because they were true. Jake had been so focused on getting revenge against Margaret that he'd compromised everything he'd sworn to protect. He placed his badge and radio on the desk, the metal making a final, definitive sound against the wood. The investigation will take 30 days, Gomez said. You'll be notified of the findings. Jake walked out of the fire station without saying goodbye to his crew. He couldn't bear to see the disappointment in their eyes, the questions they were too professional to ask out loud. The house felt different without his gear bag by the door, without the radio chatter that had been the soundtrack of his life. For over 2 decades. Jake sat at his kitchen table, staring at the legal papers that would determine whether he lost his home along with his job. His phone buzzed. A text from Tom Chen saw the news. Anything I can do? Jake started to type a response, then deleted it. What was he supposed to say? That he'd thrown away his career for the sake of revenge against a neighbor. That he'd been so consumed with anger that he'd forgotten what it meant to be a firefighter. A knock at the door interrupted his self-pity. He opened it to find Sarah Martinez standing on his porch, still in her department uniform. Can I come in? She asked. They sat in his living room, the silence stretching between them like a chasm. You lied to me, Sarah said finally. Oh no. You put my crew at risk. You made me an accessory to your personal vendetta. Oh no. Do you? Her voice was quiet, but Jake could hear the anger underneath. Because I've been thinking about this all week, and I can't figure out if you're sorry for what you did or just sorry you got caught. Jake looked at her, really looked at her. Sarah Martinez had been his partner for 5 years, had trusted him with her life more times than he could count. She deserved better than excuses. I'm sorry, he said. For all of it. For lying, for putting you in an impossible position, for forgetting what we are supposed to stand for. That's a start. Sarah stood up. But sorry doesn't fix this. The department's reputation is damaged. The mayor's talking about reviewing our budget. And Margaret Thornfield is on every news show in the city talking about how firefighters abuse their authority. After Sarah left, Jake found himself standing in his driveway, looking at the fire truck that had started all this trouble. The evening sun glinted off its chrome, and for a moment, he could almost pretend that everything was still normal. Then he saw Margaret watching him from her window. She came out of her house a few minutes later, walking across the street with the same purposeful stride she'd had the morning this all began. But something was different now. The anger was still there, but it was tempered with something else, satisfaction. Maybe, or vindication. I heard about your suspension, she said. News travels fast. Faster when you're the lead story on 3 different networks. Margaret's smile was sharp. Did you think I wouldn't fight back? Did you think I'd just let you destroy my property and walk away? Jake studied her face, looking for some sign of the woman who'd once baked cookies for new neighbors, who'd organized charity drives for local families in need. That woman was gone, replaced by someone hardened by years of petty authority and suburban warfare. What do you want, Margaret? I want you gone. Out of this neighborhood, away from decent people who don't deserve to live next to someone who abuses their authority. And if I refuse? Margaret's smile widened. Then I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you really are. She pulled out her phone and showed him a video. It was security footage from her house, showing Jake in his backyard the morning of the training exercise. The timestamp showed him measuring the distance from the burn pile to her fence, 15 feet, not 30. I've had cameras installed since the community center incident, she said. I knew you were up to something, so I was ready. Jake watched himself on the screen, watched the moment when he'd made the decision that would cost him everything. He'd been so focused on the legal technicalities that he'd forgotten about the human element, the fact that Margaret was smarter than he'd given her credit for. "You've been planning this," he said. "Ever since you embarrassed me at the community center. Did you think I'd forget? Did you think I'd let some working-class hero make me look like a fool?" There it was again, working class. The words that had started this whole mess. "I saved that building," Jake said quietly. "You violated protocol. You entered community property without authorization. You made me look incompetent in front of the board. I put out a fire. You showed off." Margaret's mask slipped for a moment, revealing the raw anger underneath. "You couldn't just let me handle it. You had to be the hero, had to make everyone see how important you are." Jake realized with sudden clarity that this had never been about the fire truck or the HOA rules. This was about power, about control, about two people who'd let their pride turn them into enemies. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now you sell the house and move somewhere more appropriate for your station in life. Somewhere you can park your toy fire truck." Jake spent the next 3 days in a fog of regret and desperate planning. He'd always been a man of action, but now he was trapped in a web of legal proceedings and bureaucratic investigations. Every avenue seemed blocked, every option a dead end. Then Tom Chen knocked on his door. "You look like hell," Tom said, settling into Jake's kitchen chair with the easy familiarity of someone who'd been a good neighbor for years. "Feel worse than I look." Tom set a manila folder on the table. "Maybe this will help." Jake opened it to find a stack of printouts, HOA meeting minutes, financial records, and correspondence between Margaret and the management company. His pulse quickened as he scanned the documents. "Where did you get these?" "Let's just say Margaret isn't the only one who's been paying attention." Tom's smile was grim. "I've been on the HOA board for 3 years and I've watched her turn this neighborhood into her personal fiefdom. What she did to you was the last straw." Jake studied the papers more carefully. There were expense reports for consulting fees paid to Margaret's sister's landscaping company. Vendor contracts awarded without proper bidding. Authorization for expenditures that should have required board approval. "She's been embezzling from the HOA?" Jake asked. "Not exactly. Everything's technically legal, but she's been steering contracts to friends and family, inflating costs, and taking kickbacks. The landscaping contract alone is overpriced by about 40%. Jake felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. "This is leverage. It's more than that. Look at the dates." Jake flipped through the invoices again, and his blood ran cold. The largest landscaping payment, $15,000 for emergency tree removal, was dated the day after the community center fire. The same day Margaret had confronted him about unauthorized access to community property. She used HOA funds to pay for personal services, Tom continued. That tree removal was on her property, not community land. "I've got photos." The pieces were falling into place. Margaret's aggressive response to Jake's actions wasn't just about wounded pride, it was about protecting a much larger scheme. She'd been skimming from the HOA for years, and Jake's heroics at the community center had made her paranoid about scrutiny. "Why are you showing me this?" Jake asked. Tom's expression hardened. "Because I've watched her destroy 3 families in this neighborhood. The Johnsons moved out last year after she fined them into bankruptcy over a fence height dispute. The Rodriguezes lost their house fighting her in court over parking violations. And now she's coming after you. What do you want in return?" "I want her gone. And I want this neighborhood to remember what it means to be a community instead of a dictatorship." Jake looked at the documents again, his mind racing through possibilities. Margaret had played her hand perfectly, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed Jake would roll over and accept defeat. "I need to make some calls," he said. The first call was to David Kim, who listened in stunned silence as Jake outlined the evidence. "This changes everything," the lawyer said. "If we can prove she's been using her position for personal gain, we can argue that the HOA complaint against you was malicious prosecution. What about the criminal charges she's threatening? Still a problem. The video evidence is damning and your suspension gives credibility to her claims. But this creates reasonable doubt about her motives. The second call was to Sarah Martinez. Jake, I can't talk to you while you're under investigation, she said, but her voice lacked its earlier anger. I'm not calling about the investigation. I'm calling about Margaret Thornfield. He outlined the HOA corruption, the financial irregularities, and the pattern of abuse. Sarah listened without interrupting. Why are you telling me this? She asked finally. Because I think the community center fire wasn't an accident. The silence stretched between them. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was different, sharper, more focused. What do you mean? Look at the timing. Margaret's been skimming from the HOA for years. I put out that fire and gained access to community property. The next day, she authorizes a $15,000 payment to her sister's company. Then she starts targeting me with HOA violations. You think she started the fire? I think she saw an opportunity to cover her tracks and got caught off guard when I showed up. Everything since then has been damage control. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Jake, if you're right about this, it means I'm not the only one who's been playing with fire. The third call was the most important one. Jake dialed the number for the state fire marshal's office and asked to speak to investigator Rebecca Torres. Captain Morrison, Torres said. I heard about your suspension. I'm sorry. Don't be. She earned it. But I need your help with something bigger. Torres had been investigating suspicious fires for 15 years and she had a reputation for thoroughness that made district attorneys love her and arsonists fear her. If anyone could uncover the truth about the community center fire, it was her. I'm listening, she said. Jake laid out his theory, backed by the financial evidence Tom had provided. Torres asked sharp questions, demanded specifics, and challenged his assumptions. By the end of the conversation, Jake could hear the excitement in her voice. I'll need to review the original fire report, she said. And I'll want to interview everyone who was at the scene. Including Margaret. Especially Margaret. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Jake was in his garage, working on the fire truck's engine, when Margaret appeared in the doorway. She looked different, older, more fragile, as if the weight of her secrets was finally becoming too much to bear. We need to talk, she said. Jake didn't look up from the engine. About what? About the investigation. About what you think you know. I don't think I know anything. I know you've been stealing from the HOA. I know you used community funds to pay for personal services. And I know you're scared that it's all about to come out. Margaret's composure cracked. You don't understand. I never meant for any of this to happen. Which part? The embezzlement or the arson? The word hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Margaret's face went pale, and for a moment, Jake thought she might collapse. It wasn't supposed to be a real fire, she whispered. The confession hit Jake like a punch to the gut. He'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed was different. Margaret Thornfield, HOA president and pillar of the community, had committed arson to cover up her financial crimes. What happened? He asked. Margaret sat down heavily on a workbench, her hands shaking. I was meeting with the management company's accountant. They were asking questions about the landscaping contracts, about the expense reports. I panicked. So you started a fire? I thought if there was an emergency, it would distract from the financial review. I used some cleaning supplies in the kitchen, made it look like an electrical problem. It was supposed to be small, controlled. But it wasn't. The ventilation system spread the flames faster than I expected. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late to stop it. Jake stood up slowly, his mind reeling. You could have killed someone. Oh no. Margaret's voice was barely audible. I've been living with that knowledge for weeks. And then you showed up and put it out, and I realized how close I'd come to destroying everything. So you decided to destroy me instead. Margaret looked up at him, and Jake saw something he'd never expected: genuine remorse. I was scared. Terrified that someone would figure out what I'd done. When you gained access to the building, I thought maybe you'd seen something, maybe you knew. I had to discredit you before you could expose me. By framing me for property damage. By making sure no one would believe you if you tried to tell the truth. Jake studied her face, looking for deception, but all he saw was a broken woman who'd let fear drive her to increasingly desperate acts. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because I'm tired of running. Tired of lying. Tired of being afraid. Margaret stood up, her decision made. I'm going to confess. To the arson. To all of it. The embezzlement, the fire, the malicious prosecution. All of it. Jake felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Victory, but at what cost? Margaret's confession would clear his name, but it would also destroy her life completely. What about the criminal charges against me? He asked. I'll withdraw the complaint. Tell the district attorney that the video evidence was taken out of context, that I was retaliating against you for legitimate fire department activities. Margaret walked to the garage door, then turned back one last time. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. You're a good man, Jake Morrison. Better than I deserve. She left him alone with his thoughts and his fire truck, the afternoon sun slanting through the garage door. Jake's phone buzzed, a text from Chief Rodriguez: need to see you. Emergency meeting. As Jake headed toward his truck, he realized that Margaret's confession would solve his immediate problems, but it wouldn't erase the damage he'd done to his own reputation. He'd still lied to his captain, still used department resources for personal revenge, still compromised his integrity. The truth would set him free, but it wouldn't make him whole. But as he drove toward the fire station, Jake Morrison made a decision that would define the rest of his career and his life. He was going to earn his redemption the hard way. Chief Rodriguez looked older than his 58 years as he sat across from Jake in the conference room. The suspension paperwork lay between them like a bridge neither man wanted to cross. 3 weeks had passed since Margaret's confession, and the media firestorm that followed had consumed everything in its path. The DA dropped all charges this morning, Rodriguez said. Margaret Thornfield pled guilty to arson, embezzlement, and filing false police reports. She's looking at 18 months minimum. Jake nodded. He'd expected this news, but hearing it confirmed brought no satisfaction. What about the department investigation? Completed. Rodriguez slid a thick folder across the table. You're cleared of criminal wrongdoing, but the Internal Affairs Board found you violated multiple department policies. Failure to verify safety protocols, misrepresentation of facts to a superior officer, and using department resources for personal matters. What's the recommendation? Termination. The word hit Jake like a physical blow, even though he'd been expecting it. 23 years of service, and it was ending with a bureaucratic execution. However, Rodriguez continued, his voice carefully neutral, the board also noted your exemplary record, your actions during the community center fire, and the extraordinary circumstances surrounding the case. They are offering an alternative. Jake looked up. Which is? Voluntary demotion to firefighter, 6 months unpaid suspension, mandatory retraining, and 2 years probation. You'd lose your captain's rank and pension credits, but you'd keep your job. And my crew would be reassigned. You'd start over at Station 19 under Captain Williams. Jake stared at the paperwork, weighing his options. Starting over at the bottom wasn't just about rank or money, it was about earning back the trust he'd thrown away. It was about proving that he still deserved to call himself a firefighter. I'll take it, he said. Rodriguez's relief was visible. Good. Report to Station 19 Monday morning. And Jake, don't make me regret this. The weekend passed in a blur of packing and preparation. Jake boxed up his captain's gear, his commendations, the photos from 2 decades of fires and rescues. Each item felt like a weight lifting from his shoulders, or maybe a weight being added to his conscience. Sunday evening, as he loaded the last box into his truck, Tom Chen appeared at the end of the driveway. Heard about the deal with the department, Tom said. How are you holding up? Been better? Been worse? Jake closed the tailgate with more force than necessary. How's the neighborhood handling everything? Tom's smile was wry. Half the people think you're a hero for exposing Margaret. The other half think you're a fool for throwing away your career over a fence. What do you think? I think you're human. I think you made mistakes and you're paying for them. But I also think you saved this community from something a lot worse than damaged property. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the suburban rooflines. The neighborhood looked the same as it had 6 months ago, but Jake knew everything had changed. Margaret's house sat empty, a for sale sign stuck against the scorched fence that nobody had bothered to repair. Any regrets? Tom asked. Jake looked at his fire truck, gleaming in the driveway under the streetlights. In a few hours, he'd drive it to a storage facility across town. The HOA had dropped their lawsuit, but he couldn't afford to keep paying the insurance and maintenance while serving an unpaid suspension. Yeah, he said. But not the ones you'd expect. Station 19 was a different world from the suburban station where Jake had spent most of his career. Located in the industrial district, it served a rough neighborhood where fires were frequent and calls ran the gamut from overdoses to domestic violence to industrial accidents. The crew was younger, hungrier, less forgiving of mistakes. Captain Marcus Williams was a 15-year veteran with a reputation for running a tight ship. He'd made it clear from day one that Jake's past meant nothing at his station. I don't care if you were the fire chief himself, Williams had said during Jake's first briefing. You're a probationary firefighter now. You'll earn every bit of respect you get, and you'll get exactly what you deserve. Jake's new partner was Tommy Nguyen, a 5-year veteran who'd grown up in the neighborhood and had little patience for fallen heroes. You're the guy who burned down his neighbor's fence, right? Tommy had asked on their first shift. Something like that. My mom always said playing with fire was a good way to get burned. Tommy was right, of course. Jake had gotten burned, professionally, personally, financially. But as the weeks passed, he began to understand that the burning was necessary. Like a controlled burn in a forest, it had cleared away the dead growth and made room for something new to emerge. The work was harder than he remembered. His body, accustomed to the lighter duties of a captain, struggled with the physical demands of firefighting. His pride, accustomed to giving orders, chafed at taking them. But gradually, something unexpected happened. He began to remember why he'd become a firefighter in the first place. It wasn't about rank or recognition or respect from neighbors. It was about the moment when you ran toward danger while everyone else ran away. It was about the grateful look in a victim's eyes when you pulled them from a burning building. It was about being part of something bigger than yourself. 6 weeks into his probation, the call came in at 2:47 a.m. Structure fire, multiple occupants. Trapped, all units respond. Jake suited up with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times, but his heart was pounding like a rookie's. The apartment building was fully involved when they arrived, flames shooting from every window on the second floor. Captain Williams deployed his crew with military precision, ladder company to the roof, engine company to interior attack, rescue team to search and rescue. Morrison, Nguyen, you're with me, Williams shouted over the roar of the flames. Third floor, east side. Reports of a family trapped in apartment 3E. They made their way up the smoke-filled stairwell, visibility near zero, the heat growing more intense with each step. Jake's training took over, his body moving with muscle memory, while his mind stayed focused on the task ahead. Apartment 3E was an inferno. The living room was fully involved, but they could hear voices from the back bedroom, a woman's voice, high with panic, and a child crying. This way, Jake called, leading Tommy through the smoke toward the sound. They found them in the bathroom, a young mother huddled in the bathtub with her 6-year-old daughter, water from the shower head providing their only protection from the heat and smoke. We are here to help, Jake shouted, his voice muffled by his mask. Are you hurt? My daughter, the woman gasped. She's not breathing well. The smoke, Jake looked at the little girl and saw himself 23 years ago, carrying his first victim from a burning building. The same terror, the same desperate hope, the same absolute trust that he would get them out safely. "Tommy, take the mother. I've got the girl." Jake scooped up the child, feeling her small body trembling against his chest. She was conscious but barely responsive, her breathing shallow and rapid. They had maybe 2 minutes to get her to fresh air before smoke inhalation became critical. The trip back through the apartment was a nightmare of heat and falling debris. Jake's oxygen alarm was sounding, warning him that his air supply was running low, but he pushed forward. Behind him, he could hear Tommy guiding the mother through the maze of smoke and flame. They emerged from the building to the welcome sight of paramedics and fresh air. Jake handed the little girl to the EMTs and collapsed against the side of the ambulance, his legs suddenly weak with exhaustion and relief. "Nice work in there," Captain Williams said, appearing at his side. That was textbook search and rescue. Jake watched the paramedics work on the little girl, saw the moment when her breathing stabilized and her eyes focused. Her mother was crying with relief, holding her daughter's hand as they loaded her into the ambulance. "Just doing my job," Jake said. "No," Williams replied. "You were doing what you were born to do." As the ambulance drove away, Jake felt something shift inside him. The guilt and shame that had been his constant companions for months didn't disappear, but they transformed into something else: determination, purpose, the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Tommy clapped him on the shoulder. "Not bad for an old-timer. Maybe there's hope for you yet." Jake smiled for the first time in months. "Maybe there is." As they rode back to the station, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He opened it to find a photo, the little girl from the fire, awake and smiling in her hospital bed, holding a drawing of a fire truck. The message below. The photo was simple: "Thank you for saving my daughter. Some heroes don't need recognition. They just need to be who they are." Jake stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. He didn't need thanks or recognition. He just needed to be the man he'd always been underneath the mistakes and the pride and the anger. He just needed to be a firefighter. But as they pulled into the station, Jake's radio crackled with an emergency call that would test everything he thought he knew about redemption, forgiveness, and the true cost of heroism. "All units respond, structure fire at 1247 Willowbrook Circle. Multiple occupants possibly trapped. Unknown cause, wind-driven flames spreading rapidly." Jake's blood turned to ice. Willowbrook Circle. His neighborhood. His street. Captain Williams was already moving, his voice cutting through the chaos of the station. "Engine 19, ladder 19, rescue 19, roll out. Morrison, you're staying here." "Captain, that's my neighborhood. I know every house, every layout. You're on probation, and you have a personal connection to the scene. Department policy says you stay here." Jake watched helplessly as his crew rolled out without him, the diesel engines disappearing into the night. He stood in the empty station, the silence deafening after months of constant noise and activity. His personal phone rang. "Tom Chen." "Jake, are you coming? It's Margaret's house. The whole block might go up." The irony wasn't lost on him. The woman who tried to destroy his life, whose house he'd damaged in his quest for revenge, was now facing the very disaster she'd once falsely claimed. And he was forbidden from helping. "I can't. I'm not allowed to respond to calls in my own neighborhood. Screw policy. People are going to die." Jake looked at his gear, at the fire truck. He'd driven to work that morning, at the badge that said probationary firefighter instead of captain. Everything in his training, his instincts, his very soul screamed at him to respond. But he'd learned the hard way that good intentions without proper authority led to disaster. "I'll monitor from here," he said, hanging up. The radio chatter painted a grim picture. The fire had started in Margaret's empty house, the electrical system damaged but not properly repaired after the insurance investigation. High winds were driving the flames toward the Chen house, the Henderson's place, the entire row of homes where families were sleeping. "Engine 19 to dispatch, we need additional units. Fire is spreading faster than we can contain it. Requesting mutual aid from all available departments." Jake closed his eyes, visualizing the scene. He knew that street better than anyone, knew which houses had elderly residents who might need help evacuating, knew where the water mains were located, knew the wind patterns that would drive the fire. His radio crackled again. Engine 19-2. Dispatch, we have a problem. Homeowner at 1251 Willowbrook reports his elderly father is trapped on the second floor, can't make it down the stairs. Smoke inhalation suspected. 1251 Willowbrook. The Patterson house. Jake knew it well, narrow staircase, single exit, and old Mr. Patterson who'd refused to install the stair lift his son had been urging him to get. Ladder 19 responding to 1251 for rescue, came the reply. ETA 4 minutes. 4 minutes. In a wind-driven fire, that was a lifetime. Mr. Patterson didn't have 4 minutes. Jake's hands moved without conscious thought, grabbing his gear, his helmet, his oxygen mask. He was halfway to his personal truck when his rational mind caught up. If he responded, he'd be fired. No second chances, no probation, no redemption. His career would be over, and he'd face criminal charges for violating department orders. But if he didn't respond, Mr. Patterson would die. The choice, Jake realized, wasn't really a choice at all. He arrived at Willowbrook Circle to find a scene from hell. Margaret's house was fully engulfed, the flames reaching 60 feet into the night sky. The wind was driving embers across the street, igniting spot fires on the Chen roof and the Henderson garage. Engine 19 was deployed between the houses, their streams barely containing the spread. Ladder 19 was setting up for the rescue attempt. But Jake could see they were positioning wrong. They didn't know about the addition Mr. Patterson had built 10 years ago, the one that changed the bedroom layout. He found Captain Williams coordinating the attack from the street. Morrison. What the hell are you doing here? The Patterson rescue, you're setting up on the wrong side of the house. The bedroom's been moved. It's on the east side now, not the west. Williams looked at the ladder truck, then back at Jake. The decision took him less than 2 seconds. Show me. They ran toward 1251, Jake's intimate knowledge of the neighborhood guiding them through the chaos. The Patterson house was filling with smoke, but it wasn't fully involved yet. They had maybe 10 minutes before the fire spread from Margaret's property. There, Jake pointed to a second-floor window. That's his bedroom. The staircase is interior, completely smoke-filled by now. Williams keyed his radio. Ladder 19, repositioned to the east side of the structure. Second-floor window, elderly male trapped. The ladder truck moved with practiced precision, extending its aerial toward the bedroom window. But as they watched, another problem became apparent. The window was too small for a standard rescue, and Mr. Patterson was too frail to climb down the ladder on his own. We need someone to go up and carry him down, Williams said. Tommy's our lightest climber, but is working the interior attack. Jake looked at the ladder, then at the burning house next door. The wind was picking up, and embers were starting to land on the Patterson roof. In 5 minutes, maybe less, this rescue would become a recovery. I'll go, he said. Morrison, you're not authorized, Captain, I know this man. I know his medical conditions, his mobility issues. I can get him down that ladder faster than anyone else. Williams stared at him for a long moment, weighing policy against necessity. Around them, the fire roared and the radio chattered with urgent updates. Do it, Williams said. But if you die up there, I'm putting it in your personnel file. Jake was already moving, climbing the ladder with the speed born of 2 decades of experience. The metal rungs were hot from the radiant heat, and embers swirled around him like deadly snow. He reached the bedroom window and looked inside. Mr. Patterson was on the floor beside his bed, conscious but barely responsive. Smoke was seeping under the bedroom door, and Jake could hear the ominous crackling that meant the fire was closer than they'd thought. Mr. Patterson, it's Jake Morrison from across the street. I'm here to get you out. The old man looked up with unfocused eyes. Jake? What are you doing here? I thought you moved away. Still here, sir. Still helping neighbors. Jake climbed through the window and assessed the situation. Mr. Patterson was breathing but weak, probably suffering from smoke inhalation. The bedroom door was hot to the touch, the hallway was compromised. Can you walk? Jake asked. My legs, they don't work so good anymore. Jake made the calculation. Mr. Patterson weighed maybe 140 pounds, but getting him through the window and down the ladder would require perfect coordination. One mistake, and they'd both fall. I'm going to carry you to the window, then we are going down together. Trust me. Mr. Patterson nodded weakly. Trusted you when you saved our community center. Trust you now. Jake lifted the old man in a fireman's carry, feeling the familiar weight and responsibility. As they reached the window, he could see that the situation below had deteriorated. Margaret's house was now a total loss and spot fires were breaking out on 3 different roofs. But right now, there was only this moment, this rescue, this choice to put someone else's life ahead of his own consequences. The descent was a nightmare of heat and wind and burning debris. Jake moved one careful step at a time, Mr. Patterson's weight distributed across his shoulders, his hands gripping the ladder rungs with desperate precision. Twice, gusts of wind nearly knocked them off balance. Once, a burning ember landed on Jake's helmet, the heat searing through to his scalp. But they made it. Paramedics took Mr. Patterson the moment Jake reached the ground, whisking him away to an ambulance and oxygen therapy. Jake collapsed against the ladder truck, his legs shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen, Captain Williams said, or the stupidest. Maybe both. Before Jake could respond, his attention was caught by a commotion near the fire line. A woman was running toward Margaret's burning house, screaming incoherently. That's Mrs. Chen, someone shouted. She thinks her cat is still inside Margaret's place. Jake looked at the burning structure. Margaret's house was beyond saving, the roof collapsed, the walls compromised. Anyone who went inside would likely not come out. But Mrs. Chen was already running toward the flames. Jake moved without thinking, tackling her gently before she could reach the door. Mrs. Chen, stop. It's not safe. Whiskers, she sobbed. He got out when we evacuated, but he always hides in Margaret's garden shed when he's scared. The garden shed. Jake looked toward the back of Margaret's property and saw it, a small wooden structure, not yet fully involved but surrounded by fire. If the cat was in there, it had maybe minutes before the flames reached it. I'll get him, Jake said. Morrison, no, Captain Williams commanded. That structure is about to collapse. It's not worth the risk. Jake looked at Mrs. Chen's tear-stained face, then at the burning shed. He thought about choices and consequences, about the difference between heroism and stupidity, about the price of redemption. Sometimes, he said, it's not about worth. It's about who we choose to be. The garden shed was an island of relative safety surrounded by an ocean of fire. Jake approached it through a gap in the flames, his turnout gear protecting him from the radiant heat but not from the smoke that burned his eyes and throat. He found Whiskers exactly where Mrs. Chen had said he'd be, huddled behind a bag of potting soil, terrified but alive. The cat didn't resist as Jake scooped